Kimberly, what's up? It's a Monday, so this should be the start of my journal for the next week. Yeah, been having difficulty uploading the other one. It's not so easy living in the modern times without a cell phone of some kind. So yeah, pardon the late upload of the first journal week, but that's just hopefully I'll figure something out and you'll be watching even this video. Yeah, I learned how to edit yesterday, a little bit at least, and I feel like the last video is going to be maybe a little over edited, maybe I got a little overzealous, but we'll see. We'll see how it turns out. Hopefully, it's not so bad. Well, yesterday I read the second chapter named Caitlin in the Game of Thrones, or just Game of Thrones. Yeah, more political. Like before, we were setting up the political players, and now we're seeing a little bit more of the political maneuvering. I think there's a lot of subterfuge kind of stuff going on, messages inside of messages. Yeah, I feel like this kind of stuff would happen a lot in a society like this with the case system and a lot of political maneuvering and stuff like that. We'll see where it goes. Um, as for like how it was dressed and seen, yeah, it it seemed kind of private, and maybe that's the whole point of it being like this. These are the scenarios, the times when something very private and secretive would, be talked about amongst trusted people. Yeah, it was good. I'm gonna keep saying, yeah, it was good. Not really much of a conflict with Martin's writing style. I also read the next chapter of The Great Conversation, Education for All. Here, yeah, I agree that, like, the idea that we always hear growing up here in the States of all men are created equal, and if we are equal, then we should have equal things, equal dignity, equal opportunity. The idea that if we're all different but still valid, then we should have education, a standard education, not one that's catered to prejudices or catering towards, niche corner case ideas. All that on top is fine, I think, but as long as there's a base to start off of, yeah, I think that's what we're trying to do with our modern education, but it's still, nah, man, it still feels like we're just trying to make tools out of people. So I think a lot of people probably share that sentiment, and the lucky few that don't, well, yeah, you're lucky. All right, I'll see you Tuesday. Yo, what's up? So yesterday I was doing my reading, and we'll see how much I remember, because man, I was freezing my brain solid. So I read Aria. Aria? I hope that's how I pronounce it. How I should pronounce it. Yeah, this chapter we follow one of the Starks, one of the girls, and you could kind of tell that she's kind of an outcast. Uh, doesn't feel like the other sister at all, which is fine. But in that society, well, she needs to be more womanly and know how to sew. And she gets in trouble, goes and gets her wolf, and goes and hangs out with her brother, watching Bran and one of the other kids. I think he's a Lannister, and they're fighting, and they're not really, going at it like how I would expect people to actually learn how to fight. But it is what it is. Kids will have to, have to do their things as nobles, and they have to do their duties. And it shows the contrast of being ill-fitted really, for the job. And in this episode, we see the famous Joffrey, right? Like, so much so that he's so famous now that even just calling someone a Joffrey, you kind of know what kind of Nepo kid, kind of ill equipped, pompous kind of a person they are. Yeah, and in this chapter, he really shines that way for sure. And yet we see the other Stark, Rob, who's kind of like, you know, being taken in by his pace. Excited to see what's happening in the next chapter. I also read the next chapter of the Great Conversation, uh, titled "The Education of Adults," and the argument of, well, there needs to be a time and place, right, for education. You can't be like 40 and expect to go to school. What are you, some weirdo? That's for younger people. You're too old now. And yeah, I don't agree with that. I think the idea that you should stop being educated or want to be educated, nah, like, it doesn't matter how old you are, even if you're young or old. I mean, there's a time and place, sure, certain subjects, but if you're hungry for education and you can handle the education, well, go and learn. What the heck? The idea that, like, if you don't need to go to school, you can just stop learning and just learn in the flesh rather than actually learn from a book. That's kind of tough, right? Some stuff you learn in the flesh that you wish you should never have learned in the flesh. So mistakes are fine to make, but some mistakes, if you could be educated to not make those mistakes, would be much, much better. Humans will be, as they are, chaotic and free will, hopefully, have some free will. But man, when you make mistakes, it's terrible. All right, time to read some more. So yeah, yesterday I didn't get any reading done. So today I will be doing 2 chapters, hopefully, and catch up. Yeah. So the last time I had read Bran the second time in Game of Thrones. Yeah, this is, I think, the best chapter so far in the book. Had it not been spoiled in the show for me, again, I've only seen the first season and just remembered a couple key parts. This chapter was really good. Martin did a good job really showing what kind of person Bran is, and this kind of scenario where he's leaving home and what home means to him, and being able to see it and his connection with his home, which is different than the connection I think anybody else in the kingdom has. And then the tragedy that happens in the chapter where, yeah, it's very fairy tale, right? Where the child ends up making a mistake or not listening to the people telling him, how to behave themselves. And then that one time, all it takes is one time. And, the kid with the BB gun will shoot his eye out. Yeah, really good chapter. The best chapter so far. I also read the next chapter in the Great Conversation, The Next Great Change. This chapter, you could totally tell, was written back in the Cold War. It has a lot of Cold War sensibilities. And the idea that, we've already gotten to the point where the only good thing we could do is have a discourse conversation, because otherwise it's mutually assured destruction, right? And yeah, the problem is that we failed, in my opinion, we failed to educate, and all the conversation was really just noise. It really feels like, sure, for certain little squabbles and skirmishes, the UN and our diplomacy has been good for that. to make sure, some lives are saved, but what the big things, the big problems, and basically the blunders that he says, are inevitable, just seem to be happening every day. And yeah, it's just we're tumbling into a terrible future every day. Hopefully it stops. And if you don't feel the same way, well, great, right? I'm always wrong when it comes to negative sentiment, but that's how that feels. And this conversation that he had in this chapter, nah, man, it's we just make noise. We do not actually communicate, and it's led us to where we are today. And I don't see us, tuning into a good frequency and actually communicating. Well, let's do some more reading. So yesterday I read 2 chapters instead of my usual one. And man, yeah, it took a lot longer, basically double the time, right? And hopefully won't have to do that again. But anyways, I read the next chapter in the Game of Thrones, Tyrion. And in this chapter, we get to hang out with the Lannisters and how, disgusting and weird and evil they are. And also how common and run-of-the-mill they can be. One doesn't have to be one or the other, right? And I think besides the people who haven't learned the politics stuff yet, the children and stuff, Tyrion is the one who seems to at least know what game he's playing, right? Where the rest of them are just conceited and, full of vitriol and basically just your standard run-of-the-mill politicians, as you would think. Tyrion is educated and full of wit, and those are things that, he had to be shaped that way because of his other shape that he couldn't help. And you could tell the other Lannisters are tasteless. The Queen, Jaime, especially Joffrey. Joffrey's just written to be another person like Bran, right? Basically going to be a fairy tale, I'm sure. He's going to have a fairy tale ending in the worst way. And if he doesn't, come on, George. I also read the 2nd John chapter. And this one, we get to see the Starks basically saying goodbye from the point of John. Ned's not anywhere to be seen, but John says goodbye to his family and people who are his family who wouldn't have anything to do with them. And there I see Caitlin being she's just twisted when it comes to John by things that John has nothing to do with. But since she can't really do anything about who John is biologically, she can treat him like, something worse otherwise, right? Less than human, something that she wouldn't even treat strangers with the same kind of attitude, or I guess her servants. Civilian people. And yeah, the pittiness and the grossness of her attitude is just worse because it's against somebody who doesn't deserve it. And yeah, right, we get to see all of the characters leading up towards this exit as they're leaving. They're leaving Winterfell. It was good. It was good. I wonder where we're going to go next. I also read the last 2 chapters. I finished a book. The last 2 chapters of The Great Conversation. And so, penultimate chapter, East and West. East and West. Yeah. And this, we basically get a apology slash like statement. Here, have this and be quiet kind of thing. At least it felt like that. Or it's like, okay, these are the great books of the West, not the great books of the world. It's a lot of work and very difficult, and we don't have the expertise, the scholars, and we don't feel like it would be very appropriate for us back in the 50s or whatever to offer you a take on the East. So, a bunch of books from Asia, all that literature in India, and all over the East, what we would call the East, even the Middle East, I'm sure. We don't we don't really have any voices from there in this collection. And as well as like any women, which is like incredibly terrible in my collection, right? I think they addressed some of that later in different editions of this collection, but yeah, this has a lot of problems. But that's why you can just add them to a library and you can just say, you know what, I'm going to add all the other stuff that's missing. So hopefully in the future I can get a lot more reading done and hear some voices as well. And yeah, sure, it won't be curated by a bunch of scholars in their ivory towers, which I don't think these people really consider themselves that, since their whole point is to give an education to everybody. But yeah, no, I don't need a bunch of scholars to tell me to read books, religious books, or books of supposed knowledge. I'll get around to them eventually. It'd be nice to have some guidance, but stay curious and stay hungry for knowledge, and eventually you might, get around to every nook and cranny. And the last chapter of the book, A Letter to the Reader, in which he just makes the argument of like, we need to have educated populace. It can't just be a bunch of people who the only things that keep them together is a sense of nationalism, a sense of greed, a sense of just having to bear with it. We should come together, be cohesive, and have some kind of understanding, whatever that understanding may come from, but we need it, right? And not just an understanding of tolerance, an understanding of our pocketbooks, the economy, understanding of safety, but a social understanding, a social contract, I guess, but also like really be invested in a community. Yeah, we need it. These days it feels like we're getting to a really dark time in our country's history because of not wanting to understand one another. And yeah, but I don't know. Hopefully things things will change. And that's the end. The end of that book. I will be moving on now to the works of Homer. That's next in the books of the great books of the Western tradition or whatever. Yeah. This is going to be a more story in verse, more poetic version. This year, I had actually finished reading these. I had read Robert Fagel's version of the Iliad and the Odyssey. And yeah, I had a lot of fun with these. This is a lot more in a prose, yet still kind of in a verse style, poetic style, but it was easy to understand. And well, we'll see. We'll see where this edition seems a lot thinner, right? And these guys. We'll see how this goes. So, yeah. let's do some reading. Ooh, man, it's getting dark quick nowadays. The weather is pretty cold and the sun ain't out as much as it should be. Good old winter, huh? All right. So yesterday I read the next chapter of Game of Thrones, which is Daenerys, second chapter. And this is the scene where she finally gets married to Khal Drogo, and they have a big ceremony. And I don't know anything. I don't know much about real Mongol culture and whatever, but it really gave off the vibes of that, right? I really had the imagery of it, and yeah, hopefully, now that Daenerys is married and going over there, away from her brother, hopefully, the story starts to change a little bit for her. Because, yeah, no, not a big fan of her predicament before, and hopefully things look better in this part of the story for her going forward. I also read a new book, and the next book of the great books of the West, the Iliad. I read book one, which is, a lot more reading than I was doing before. But still, I had already read the Robert Fowles, I think, version of him, and I'm reading it again now with a new translation, or I guess an old translation, by Samuel Butler. And yeah, the language is a little bit different for sure. I had to look up some stuff like who Jove was. Apparently that's Jupiter, also Zeus. And I'm just like, all right, man, you got all these kind of AKAs. Sure. How to learn how to see who Saturn was and who Juno was, which is Hera, and Saturn being Cronus, Zeus's father. And that whole entire area of Greek mythology. If you don't know any of that, it can be a little bit rough, but that's the thing. That's just how these books go. There's always something else that you can reference, right? Going backwards. This also had some, like, a hecatomb. I didn't know what a hecatomb was, which apparently is a public sacrifice, in the Greek sense, it being a bunch of oxen, a bunch of cows. I guess oxen and cows aren't exactly the same, but what you would think of is just big cow, bull, maybe. Yeah, and in the first book, the introduction to the Iliad, we see the Greeks sacking a city that belongs to Apollo, or Apollo was worshipped there. I'm not really quite sure. I think it's a little bit of both. And the fallout from all that, and then the escalation of, one problem after the other with expectations, the roles you're supposed to have, and how subservient you're supposed to be. And between Agamemnon and Achilles, it just escalates more and more and more until eventually, man, I guess as a more base instinct, like, had Achilles just slew him there, man, I don't think I would have been fine with it. Screw Agamemnon. But that's how it works. And yeah, we also see a little bit of Olympus theater with the gods and Zeus or Jove with his, with Achilles' mother coming up there and being the supplicant and, basically making a case for Achilles. And this whole thing of Achilles' mortality is already like constant. And he knows it and everyone else knows it and what he's supposed to do and all that. Yeah, I'm excited to read chapter 2 or book 2. But man, this book has that small, not small, but that 2-column style. And whew, one book takes me a lot longer than something nowadays. Let's read some more books. Hey, happy Sunday. Hopefully it's going well for you guys. My Sunday wasn't anything special in particular. Had a crazy dream, haven't had those in a while. But nothing special about it, the typical kind of stuff. You're back in high school, you get into a fight with somebody. Yeah, it is what it is. It's just my kind of dreams. Anyways, so I read Eddard, the second chapter named Eddard, chapter like 13 or so. And this one, Ned Stark and Robert Baratheon, they're heading towards the capital, I guess. And Ed and Robert go ahead of everybody and have like a private council, and they're talking about, wouldn't it be great to be like how they were back in the days? But they're not back in the days anymore. They have responsibilities and they have titles and they have people that are, expecting things from them. So, like, nah, man. Robert seems like a bad leader, and he seems very easily to manipulate. And the Lannisters seem to have basically positioned themselves to just knock over this guy and take over. And now that Jaime Lannister is gonna line himself up to take over one side of the kingdom, and the other side's already taken over by his father. Yeah, it's not looking good for the Baratheons. And it's probably not looking good for the Starks either. I know some stuff happens because of the show, but let's see if the book is anything different. But yeah, it's a lot of fun. Cool. Now, on the opposite side, I also read Book 2 of the Iliad. Book 2 of the Iliad. Jesus Christus. This kind of stuff, what happens in this, there's some good meat in here where the gods are lying to Agamemnon and Agamemnon's lying to his people, and there's people who, throw critique at Agamemnon, and Ulysses beats him with the scepter, and, there's some good stuff in here for sure. But, this is one of the worst chapters I've read so far in any of the books. Any of the books at all, because it has some of the stuff I hate the most, which is names of people, names and names of people, places and places, all the possessions, how many ships there were, just a roll call, a grocery list, and a just so boring. I fell asleep a couple times nodding off trying to read this chapter. If it wasn't for that stuff, it'd be okay. But then again, the chapter would probably be down to a page or two. But at least, and it kind of makes sense because, when this is just performed, orally, that, yeah, okay. That's what, and they might have some of the crowd, and it might be like a sports kind of thing where they're introducing the teams, they're hyping up the blue corner and the red corner and all that, and the people in the crowds may be like, hey, they talked about Ithaca or Athens, hurrah. But as a reader reading this, sure, give it to me, put it in the book. Some people, some historians and people who really want to get into the guts of the time and place can really dissect it, have fun with it. But as a reader, this stuff's so boring. Family trees, just listing possessions. Nah. But hey, the war is at Troy. Let's see book 3. Yeah, I hope you guys had a good week. Hopefully this gets put up on a Sunday and not a Monday like last week's. But yeah, see you guys next time. Later.